Hello and welcome to Catholic Weekly, brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Raleigh, a news and information program brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Raleigh. I'm Frank Maroc. Today in our program, two topics. The first, a look at the season of Lent, which this year comes fairly early with the start of Ash Wednesday, February 13th. We'll review the Lenten practices and the liturgical services of the season, leading us up to the Paschal Triduum. In our second segment, a story on several thousand Catholics from the Diocese of Raleigh and Charlotte taking part in the North Carolina Mass for Life at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, and the annual March for Life, this year marking the 40th anniversary of the Supreme Court's controversial Roe v. Wade decision that allowed abortion in the U.S. But first, we turn our focus on the Lenten season, which is only a few days away. Joining us again is Gerard Hall, Director of the Diocesan Office of Divine Worship. Gerard, hello again.
Hello, Frank. Good to be here.
It seems like we were just putting away the Christmas decorations, and all of a sudden here we are with Easter coming right to us.
It was. I mean, you look at just a few weeks ago, our Christmas season, it ended with the baptism of the Lord, and really a couple of weeks ago, we officially ended it with the Feast of the Presentation of the Lord on February 2nd. So this is one of the earliest dates that Ash Wednesday can be, and really that's all determinate by the celebration of Easter, and it's a very complicated of a equinox and all of those things. So this is one of the earliest dates.
We're going to talk about the Lenten season, and we're going to begin with the Lenten disciplines, the Lenten practices. Now, Catholics out there are very well aware of them, but we're going to review them. So if you would just take us through it.
There are three that we look at and that have been part of our culture as Catholics, as tradition for years. I mean, this is in who we are. And we talk about that they are prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And when we look at what that means, it seems simple. They're simple words, but what the implication of them is a greater, is what Lent is for us. And if we look at them individually, we look at prayer. And we look at during the season of Lent, we're called to a deeper sense of prayer. We're called, as the church calls it, to retreat. So we're called to that. Some people take the practice going to daily mass, which they wouldn't normally, or there's extra prayers, or we have Stations of the Cross on Fridays, or there's adoration and benediction. But there's these opportunities for an ever-increasing time for prayer that we should take advantage of. That we should retreat from the world and should gather and make it an extra special effort to prayer. The second is fasting. And not just the pre-subscribed fasting of abstinence of meat on Fridays during Lent, or on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, of having only one full meal. But fasting also means fasting from those things in our lives that we overindulge, or those bad habits. And it's not just the sense, we think of it as the sense of giving up, but it's also fasting from those things that we do that we should step away from. So we look at fasting. And then we look at almsgiving. And almsgiving is that general nature of giving to the poor, but a more intensified of that is taking of those things that we're fasting from. So if we're going to fast, if we're going to give up cigarettes for Lent, and a pack of cigarettes now costs $5 or $6. So let's say somebody smoked a pack a day. So that $5 a day over 7 days is $35. Well, that $35 shouldn't go into our coffers, our bank accounts, but rather maybe that should go to the poor. In a lot of places we have these Operation Rice Bowls in parishes where we take that, we fast from a meal, or we have a less of a meal, and that money that we would have spent on a meal, we put into that rice bowl. And then that's given to Catholic relief services for hunger around the world. What's important to remember about these disciplines, if you will, of Lent, of these practices, is what does it lead us to? Correct. What does Lent lead us to? Are we the person who gives up smoking for Lent but can't wait to pick it up on Easter Sunday? Mm-hmm. We give up sweets and we can't wait to eat sweets on Easter Sunday. Have our lives been changed? Maybe for those 40 days of Lent, but should it not call us to something greater? So should that discipline call us to move from our old selves to a period of conversion to a new self? Mm-hmm. So our prayer would be that if we're going to, our prayer life it's interesting, I had a very good priest friend of mine who would say the saddest thing was he would add extra masses during Lent and then had to take them away at Easter because nobody was coming. We haven't changed our way of life. So that's what Lent should call us to, is to change our lives. We give up cigarettes, then let's not bring it back. We give up sweets, let's not bring, how do we modify and how do we change our lives?
Now, you talked about fasting. There are guidelines for fasting, and we get questions on this. What is the age of fasting?
Well, let's take it fast and abstinence because those are hand in hand. And so for abstinence, which is not eating meat on the Fridays of Lent, is from anybody who's reached their 14th birthday. So anybody who's 14 years old and above to the age of 59 are to refrain from eating meat on Fridays. That's the discipline of abstinence. Fasting, which is Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, is those who have completed their 18th year, which means on your 19th birthday, and those 59 years of age, are only to eat one full meal a day. Now, if you're in a high-stress job like a construction worker where only eating one full meal a day would bring detriment to your health, you're exempt. But as a normal course of event, you should have only one full meal. Now, what we have to remember is we can't only look at the letter of the law. We can't only look at, well, this is the age that we do it at, or this is the requirements, is that we should look at what the spirit of law is. And again, it calls us to retreat. It calls us to live differently. I remember growing up, my younger brother would stay up until midnight on Fridays so he could have a bologna sandwich. He didn't have it during the day, letter of the law, but really the spirit of the law meant nothing. We have to look at that. We have to look at it in our families. If we have a family, and let's say when you become 14, now you have to eat fish on Fridays, but your 13-year-old sibling can eat a hamburger, well, that's not the spirit of the law. That the whole family should enter into it, although they're not bound to it by the discipline of Lent. But the spirit would say the whole family participates and should retreat from eating meat. But we also look at on another side, it's just a short story which made me realize when I was living in the Diocese of Portland, Maine, we would go, I remember my first Lent there, we were going for our Lenten luncheons with the Congregational Church down the street from the Catholic Diocese office. And we'd go and have our Lenten meal, and our Lenten meal consisted of lobster rolls and clam chowder. I'm not sure how that was the discipline of Lent, that wasn't the spirit, although the letter. So we have to look and say, what are we called to do? Let's retreat from those things. Let's maybe on Friday when we abstain from meat, we don't go to a restaurant to have a good fish meal, but rather it's tuna fish from a can or codfish cakes or something of that nature.
This is being broadcast the week that Ash Wednesday begins. And Ash Wednesday, as we all know, we receive ashes on our forehead. Lately, in the last couple of years, I have noticed that other Christian denominations are now also offering ashes. Talk a little bit about Ash Wednesday.
Well, Ash Wednesday for us is this commitment. I like to call it Commitment Wednesday because what it is we're making an outward sign. We're being marked with a cross, not a very pretty cross, marked with a cross on the sign of our heads in our world. We go into our lives, not just at Catholic schools or Catholic workplaces, but we're going into hospitals, into IBM and into Xerox and into Red Hat, marked with this cross. And particularly in the South, where for us as Catholics, we're not the majority here. So it is an anomaly for people to see that. But we go we're making a public statement saying, I'm ready to change. I'm being marked with this cross. And to follow the gospel message of conversion, of repentance. And I'm telling everybody publicly that I'm going to do this. And it's not to say, well, look at me, I'm the good person, but rather you're telling the community, you've got to hold me to this. I'm making this public statement of this. I need the community to support what I'm doing. I need you to support me. Our other Christian brothers and sisters, our Protestant brothers and sisters, have looked at this and said, this says something to us as a community, and have looked and said, so they're marking there with ashes. Our churches are filled on Ash Wednesday. We add extra masses, and it's good intention of wanting to change. This is not something that people feel they have to do because there's a law. There's no obligation to attend Mass on Ash Wednesday. It's not a holy day of obligation, but it's an obligation of will. It's an obligation of spirit that we want to do that.
Okay, so now we are into Lent with Ash Wednesday. Now we're going to start taking it week by week almost. So let's go to the first Sunday is usually in our diocese, now the first two Sundays, what is called the rite of election. This is people who will be coming into our church, accepting the call to come into our church as Catholics.
Well, we mark rite of election. We mark the first Sunday of Lent with the rite of election. That's what the church calls us to with the rite of election, is that those, particularly those who are going to come into the church through baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist, the sacraments of initiation, come with the bishop to, it's there to state their intention, but more importantly, the church, through its bishop, says, I am now calling you to these sacraments. Only those who are going to be received into the church through these initiation sacraments are to come to rite of election, because it's the bishop who calls them and is very specific to call them. And along this journey are those who are coming in a profession of faith who during the Easter season will also come into the church. Now in our diocese, that number has been anywhere between 800 and 1,100 people who come just in this period of time. That's not the rest of the year, which this goes on. This is just that period of time. And what is exciting to think is last year, about 550 people throughout our diocese on Easter Vigil night, just the night, came into the church through the sacraments of baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. So the church marks that journey. Just as it's a spiritual conversion for us, it's the deepening of the conversion of those who are coming into the church, that we await their baptism, their initiation at the Easter Vigil.
Okay. And what happens is that every parish presents, correct, and the bishop is there and he signs the book.
Right, which is very important. All of us at our baptism, our names are written in what's called the Book of the Elect. That's our baptism is we're chosen at that point. We're children of God. So for these adults and these children of catechetical age, that's usually 7 and above who are coming to rite of election, and we have an ever-increasing number of children. Particularly this year, the number of children who will be coming through this ritual are ever-increasing. But we come as, that our names are inscribed in the book. Our names are inscribed. And the bishop, as the apostolic successor to the apostles, signs that in the name of the community who receives these books. And then the book is presented to the community so that the community can then see. Now, as children, when we're baptized as children, our names are inscribed in a metaphorical book. As adults, they're really inscribed in that book.
Very good. Now, the rite of election, as I mentioned, it's going to be over 2 weekends. Normally, it is held one time, and everybody comes together. But again, because as we well know, the small size of our cathedral that only seats 320, we have to hold it over 2 weekends, and it's going to be this year in
It's in 5 locations.
5 locations. Bishop Burbage will be at 2 of them.
Correct.
On 2 consecutive Sundays. Monsignor Brockman, the Vicar General,
At 2.
at 2 of them. And then we have a Hispanic.
Right, and Father Arce, who's the vicar for Hispanics, we moved last year to doing a ritual that is solely in Spanish for our ever-growing Hispanic community, whose first language is Spanish. And so that they could enter more into the ritual, because there's actually a question and answer piece. And so that they could answer more fully into it, we have it in Spanish, celebrated on the first week of Lent. So.
Okay. And the information as to where that is on our website, so you can check it out there. All right, as we process, because of time, let's move down to the Chrism Mass. Now we're moving down closer to the Triduum. The Chrism Mass in this diocese is on the Tuesday
Correct.
of Holy Week.
Normally, Chrism Mass is on the morning of Holy Thursday. I mean, that's where the ritual calls it for. But it gives us great provision that it is so important in the life of the diocese that the bishop gathers not only with the faithful of the diocese, but with the entire presbyterate, the entire priesthood of the diocese. It's encouraged that if it cannot be held on the morning of Holy Thursday, then it should be moved to another day in close proximity. Most dioceses choose Tuesday of Holy Week. It's become more of a custom. In this diocese, it is the custom to have it on the Tuesday of Holy Week, so that more people can come. And in our diocese, anybody who's been, and we always encourage, is we have overflowing crowds, because it's central to who we are. The bishop gather around his priest and deacons and religious and entire faithful. It's an incredible event to come to.
And representatives from every parish come there because they're going to get the oils for the coming year.
Correct. So we do, of all of the 95 parishes, missions, and stations of the diocese, we have representatives. So every parish is represented in the diocese, not only in the priest, but in the laity that come. And because of that reason, because the bishop blesses the oils, the sick and the catechumen, and consecrates chrism, used throughout the entire year, representatives come and get the oils to take back to their parishes.
And you mentioned the priests. This is a mass really for the bishop and his priests too.
Correct.
Because there is a renewal for them.
There is a renewal. There's a renewal of that the priests make to the bishop, the renewal of their promises made at their ordination. There's also a renewal of the bishop to the community, asking for their continued prayer for his ministry in the diocese. And all that happens before the bishop then consecrates and blesses the oils.
Okay, now we're going to move into the Paschal Triduum. You mentioned the 40 days of Lent, 40 days of Lent. And a lot of people think that it leads right up to Easter. That's not the case.
True. The great trivia of everything is how are there 40 days of Easter, of Lent, because there's really not 40 days of Lent. But there are, if you don't count the Sundays of Lent, because that's not Lent. And if you also realize that Lent ends with the evening Mass of the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday, because we enter in the Triduum at that point. And what the Triduum is, it's a Greek word moved into Latin, which means 3 days. That's literally what it means. One celebration, 3 days.
And Holy Thursday, that's the Mass of the Last Supper, the Lord's Supper.
Correct. And so that's where we begin. So we begin on Holy Thursday, and that evening Mass of the Lord's Supper, where Christ instituted not only the priesthood, but instituted the Eucharist, which is so integral to the priesthood, and vice versa, it goes both ways, but also the call to service, the mandatum, the mandate of service in the washing of the feet, so that we're all called to humble service fulfilled in Eucharist. Of course, we understand the humility of Christ was death on a cross, which then we move to and celebrate on Good Friday.
After the Mass on Thursday evening, the altar is stripped. Explain that.
The altar is stripped. It's for us, and again, it's for us to look at ourselves where we are stripped. You know, everything of that beauty of Holy Thursday. Everybody's been to that Mass. There's flowers, and we have reposition where we're spending time in vigil with Christ. But it takes a decidedly visual turn. Is that you come in and everything's bare. You know, the altar is stripped. In the olden days, cushions on priest chairs and everything were removed. So there's this sense of absence, this sense of there's something different here, that when you walk into that emptiness of the tomb, that emptiness of what Good Friday then calls us to.
And then Good Friday, the only day of the year where there is no Mass, but there is very solemn service.
Correct, which ordinarily the church calls to take place at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's where we closely associate the time of the death of Christ. But it's that, and that service is broken up into 3 parts. You have the Liturgy of the Word, which is the reading of the Passion, with these extended general intercessions, these Prayer of the Faithful, where they pray for very specific needs in a very different way. It's a dialogue almost. And then we move into Veneration of the Cross, which is really central to who we are on Good Friday, where the people come and venerate one cross, where we venerate the wood of the cross, where people come on hands and knees, kiss, touch, pilgrimage to this cross, this symbol of not only death, this element of death, this weapon of death, but also the sign of our resurrection, that people venerate it and come forward in a very powerful way. And then we come and then we remember who we are as Catholics and receive Eucharist that was blessed consecrated the day before on Holy Thursday. That connection to that meal of that Last Supper connects us to that death, which will then bring us to that resurrection that we celebrate at the Vigil.
And this is taking place in parishes, Catholic parishes throughout the world.
It is.
Throughout the world. That brings us back to the Easter, back to the Vigil. And
Well,
you've talked about that, but
Before we go to the Vigil, though, we have to look at Holy Saturday morning.
okay.
Holy Saturday morning is an interesting, because it's a non-day in the church. It doesn't exist. You can do morning prayer, but there's really nothing that the church celebrates on. You can't have weddings, you can't have funerals, you can't baptize. Nothing can happen. Nothing can happen. It's a non-day in the church, if you will, because we await the Easter Vigil, which begins in darkness after sundown, which this year, with daylight saving time, which really kind of messes up everything, the earliest a church can have the Easter Vigil is 8 o'clock. Because the church is very clear that we're to take the rule of in darkness very seriously and to the letter of the law, where we light the fire and we light the Easter candle, and that candle is processed into the darkness of the church, symbolizing that light of Christ that curses our darkness, that resurrection which cursed the death of Christ. The candle is placed and the exalted is sung, that ancient of ancients hymns that talks about that light, that creation of that light and what it means for us. And then we come and listen to Scripture. There are 7 readings in addition to the Epistle and Gospel, so a total of 9 readings that are prescribed. And the church says this is not an ordinary Sunday Mass, so you should do all of these readings because it's the history of our salvation. And after the homily, which takes that Scripture and that light and what we're going to do in initiation, and then we move to the sacraments of initiation, which we foreshadowed with the rite of election in the diocese earlier.
So some people might say, well, what does that leave for Easter morning, Sunday Easter Mass?
Well, what that leaves for Easter Mass is actually the result, if you will, of the Easter Vigil. It's what the Easter Vigil, which the church refers to as the mother of all vigil, then leads us to Easter Sunday, where we celebrate the great day of resurrection. In our experience, the Easter Vigil, if you will, counts for Easter Sunday. But in a lot of experiences, not in the United States, people come to the Easter Vigil and then they come to Easter Sunday Mass. Because they're 2 different Masses. The Vigil is different from that of Easter Sunday.
As time is running out, there are 2 more days, and now we're going past Easter. There's 2 more days. One is Ascension, and the other is Pentecost.
Ascension, which most of our audience will remember of Ascension Thursday. A while back, the Bishops' Conference wanted to look at holy days, and one of them was Ascension. And how do we have a fuller celebration of Ascension, recognizing that people weren't coming to Mass on Ascension Thursday? So by archdiocese, by province, provinces can decide as a whole when Ascension is celebrated, either on Ascension Thursday, which is the Thursday after the 6th week of Easter, or it can be celebrated on that following Sunday. In the Archdiocese of Atlanta, which is our province, it is celebrated on that Sunday. So we celebrate the solemnity of the Ascension on that Sunday, what would have been the 7th Sunday of Easter, the Sunday before Pentecost.
And then Pentecost.
And so the following Sunday is Pentecost, which really concludes Easter season with the descent of the Holy Spirit. It's with that celebration of the first Pentecost, where, if you will, the mission of the church began, ends that Easter season. So that notion of Lent, which we talked about the death, and the Easter season, which is the resurrection, Pentecost now calls us to live in the world, to go out and do the apostolic mission of who we are as Catholics.
Gerard, you did a great job walking us through that, and that's why I wanted you here. Catholics very familiar with this, but sometimes we need to be renewed and review why we do some of this. So thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
All right. And we wish you a very happy Lenten season. Thank you. We'll be back in just a moment.
We're asking folks about marriage.
Marriage makes me think of sports. You know, teamwork, dedication.
Okay, let's see what people say.
Let's say your marriage is a sport. What sport would it be?
Oh, what sport?
Basketball.
Surfing. Because we've been riding the wave for so long.
It have to be a team sport.
Ice hockey.
Baseball. It lasts a long time and not a lot happens.
Ping pong.
So why ping pong?
Always on our toes, but relaxed and fun.
Maybe doubles tennis.
So there's a lot of back and forth.
A lot of people watching.
So how many people are influenced by your marriage?
Hundreds?
Yeah.
I think we could easily fill a football stadium with all the people that we've influenced. And you really think about the ripple effect.
One influences the next and the next and the next. It's like a wave.
So it looks like a good marriage touches a lot of people.
Exactly. A good marriage goes a long way.
Want to improve your marriage? For ideas, go to foryourmarriage.org. A message from the Catholic Church.
On January 25th, several thousand Catholics from the Diocese of Raleigh and several thousand from the Diocese of Charlotte braved cold temperatures and snow and freezing rain to make their way to Washington, D.C. to take part in the annual North Carolina Mass for Life. The Mass was held at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, with Bishop Burbidge the principal celebrant. The Basilica, which seats 3,500, had more than 4,000 at the Mass. Joining Bishop Burbidge and Bishop Peter Jugas of Charlotte were priests, deacons, and seminarians from both dioceses. Assisting at the Mass were 3 Diocese of Raleigh seminarians who were scheduled to be ordained to the priesthood in early June. Following the Mass, the bishops and the faithful made their way down to Constitution Avenue, where they took part in the annual National March for Life. This year, the marchers totaled more than 550,000 people, making it one of the largest crowds ever for the gathering. At the march, we caught up with Bishop Burbidge and several of the seminarians who spoke about the importance of the day's events.
So wonderful to see so many people from the Diocese of Raleigh here today. We know that all of our efforts on behalf of protecting the unborn and promoting the sacredness of life center around 3 things: prayer and advocacy and witness. And all 3 take place today. We begin with that beautiful Mass with the Diocese of Raleigh and Charlotte filling the Basilica Shrine, an incredible sight. Praying must always be the first thing we do. Now we witness, we go march with all these young people and pillars who've been doing this throughout so many years. Now we offer witness, and then we will be meeting and greeting some of our elected officials, advocacy. So prayer, witness, and advocacy, always at the heart of what we do in the pro-life movement. And we also do it joyfully. You notice there's joy here? It's because we have the truth, because it's about life, and we're confident that God will bless our endeavors, take the seeds we offer today, and continue to produce abundant fruit. So I'm proud of all in the Diocese of Raleigh.
Among the thousands of faithful who made their way to the nation's capital were 2 students from St. Mark's Church in Wilmington, Katie Vaughn and Alexis Currents.
I guess I can't express enough how important it is to respect life and to protect it. And coming out here shows everyone that the youth in our generation is prepared to fight this. So I think that's why it's important.
The January 25th events in Washington and the January 19th pro-life events that took place in Raleigh, which included the Diocesan Love My Life Youth Mass and the rally, had record attendance by Catholics from the diocese. The attendance continues to grow each year. And that brings this week's program to a close. A reminder that you can stay up to date with news and events taking place in the Diocese of Raleigh by logging on to our website, where you'll also find this program should you miss it one week. The web address is dioceseofraleigh.org. If you'd like to follow Bishop Burbidge on Twitter, @Bishop Burbidge, or if you'd like to receive his tweets as cell phone text messages, simply text "Follow Bishop Burbidge" 40404. Catholic Weekly is brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Raleigh. Our technical director is Mark Height. Until next week, I'm Frank Maroc, wishing you peace and blessings.